thank you for joining us today. This edition is brought to you by Church on Main, a welcoming and affirming church that is a safe place for you to be loved and accepted because we believe that's what Jesus wants us to do. Contact Church on Main at office at churchonmain.church for more details. Our podcast, we're going to be discussing challenges and opportunities that we all face, no matter what season of life we're in. Our hosts will offer some practical tips we've learned over the years and also share how love and grace can help each of us while we're trying to maintain hope. Today's topic, the inconvenient truth about sin. In this episode, we're going to break down a real interesting study by WalletHub that they did in 2024 that ranks U.S. states by their sinfulness. Isn't that an interesting statement? And it's measured through dramatic internet browsing, violent crimes per capita, alcohol use, and gambling. But how do these modern measures really align with the definition of sin? We're going to explore some findings and dive into what the Bible says about behaviors and reflecting on morality in today's world. So today we have Tanya Dinkle, who's a personal and professional coach, and also Tommy McDarris, a senior pastor of Church on Main in Blacksburg, Virginia. So we're going to talk about that topic that everybody talks about or tries to avoid, sin, and how we measure sin, or is measuring sin a good thing? This is a very interesting study.
It's a very interesting
study. If nobody's
study.
ever looked at this study, it is very interesting because they were very specific of what they were looking for in ranking sins. They ranked it by anger and hatred, jealousy, excesses and vices, and greed. How the heck do you rank sins? And why do you rank sins? And is this the good thing to do?
Well, we like to measure everything, right?
We don't.
I
Don't
think
we?
before we get on sin too hard, we need to be a little careful because if it wasn't for sin, I wouldn't have a job.
Let's keep it grounded.
I'd be having to teach history or something. You know? Oh my!
Well, okay. So, but to kind of level set, and I started laughing, Steve, when you said, the thing that we try to avoid is sin. Well, I don't know that we all try to avoid sin, right. But really, the Bible does say very specific things about sin, which is kind of where we want to bring this today. Is this study that is very interesting and the parameters they set around it, and kind of how that balances up against what we are taught in the Bible, and what this study turned into was what is the most sinful state. And then there was, Steve, we were talking before recording about kind of the spin that the article took. So you want to go ahead and do a spoiler alert because we've talked about being aware of how people are trying to influence opinions on this podcast before. So,
and the spin that they're taking on this is, should states, governments, societies and communities invest resources and money to help curb people's vices and get them rehabilitated. So it's an interesting take on how to adjust societal behavior in looking at this. So, by ranking sins, it looks like they're saying, well, we should spend money here, or we should develop this program here, and then things like that for certain people who fit the edges of this bad behavior area.
Mm-hmm. What has been determined as bad behavior, right? Because the person may not see it as bad behavior. I mean, in all fairness, we're talking alcoholism and gambling and other things that truly could have been in their home environment their entire life. They don't know any different. They don't know that it's harmful in many ways, right? So we kind of want to remember that different people's perspectives are going to color whether or not they think that this behavior is wrong. And I'll just be very upfront from the beginning. I'm sure this will surprise lots of people, including you, Tommy. My perspective on this is that you can't legislate this. This has to be something that the person understands and wants to change. They want to do something different. And notice I didn't say better. They want to do something different. And they, in my coaching sessions with people, I get to a point where I'm like, okay, how angry are you at your current situation? Because if you're angry enough, then I know you're committed enough to make the behavior changes that we're going to need to make to get the progress that you want to see. It's a very similar concept here. Are you angry enough with your current situation that you are committed to make a change?
And I go one step. I don't know if it's one step beyond that. It's kind of in the same vein. But when people come to me and they're dealing with any of these kinds of things, I'd look for how broken are they as well. Because sometimes they may not be, there may be an anger there that they've fallen into that situation, but they have become so broken, and it has taken such a toll on them or their family or their job or so forth, that they've just reached the end of their rope, and they're saying, I can't keep going. I just had that happen just very recently of someone who came, and they admitted they had a significant problem, and they said, I can't keep doing this. I'm going to destroy everything that I have.
Yeah.
Well, that's a place of broken. They were angry at themselves that they let themselves get into that, but they were also very broken because now it's affecting people they love.
Yeah.
And they suddenly found themselves realizing, I've got to deal with my problem, or I'm going to destroy things that I really do love about my family.
Kind of reaching a breaking point.
That's right. It was truly a breaking point in all of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that they don't take quite into consideration, excuse me, is that biblically and from our point of view, of a faith point of view, there's a difference in sin and sins. Sin is the condition that makes you make bad choices. Everybody lives with that sense of temptation, whatever else is down inside. The same sin that makes somebody cheat on their income taxes, the sin that made Adolf Hitler go completely nuts. It depends on how you let things control you and how deeply you fall into it. Sins are the things we do as a result of that. It's the bad choices that we make. It's, becoming an alcoholic. It's, being addicted to gambling. It's all of those things that we start doing, and then it grows and it gets out of control. The condition, from a biblical point of view and from my professional point of view, we have to deal with the condition in order to fix the sins, plural. You have to find a place where people admit, I've got this problem.
Right.
And I need to figure out how I'm going to deal with that problem, because we all deal with it in one form or the other.
Right. But dealing with it is what can look very different from person to person. And honestly, the dealing with it is oftentimes where the judgment from other people comes, right? Because how you think you need to deal with this particular situation may not be how I think you should deal with this particular situation. So, and we have to be real careful about that, because remember, it's not our job to judge.
Yeah.
We all have a judgment day, but Tommy, you're not judging me at the end of the day, right? And that's just, we have to remember that. And I think as humans, we forget that.
Yeah.
Like we climb onto whatever whatever soapbox that we're going to get on, and we start quoting scripture, or we start quoting, things that we believe to be true. And in many cases, these are well-meaning people. They're trying to help people find the right path. But it's from their perspective, not taking into consideration the unique circumstances that each of us have to deal with through those as well.
You mentioned a minute ago that maybe they grew up with it in this situation. I dealt with a family, basically, but particularly with one person that led to the others, that they had serious problems with alcohol, but just about, they were student about every night. They were at the bars downtown. It was getting worse and worse. And one day they came to me and was, doing some counseling, and they started mentioning the bad choices that they made when they were doing that. And I said, then why do you keep doing it? You know that it's harming you. And she looked at me really hard, and she said, I don't think it ever occurred to me it was wrong. And I said, why? And she then started talking about the family she was raised in and where it came from. And I thought, okay, that's the only perspective you ever saw growing up. That's the only way that you had fun in your family.
That's an interesting perspective too, because from her perspective, it wasn't that it was wrong, but it made her feel bad.
Yes. That was
so,
exactly right.
If you're looking for a clue as to whether or not something may be harmful to you or a bad choice, but you're not sure if it constitutes bad versus good, how does it make you feel? Mm-hmm. Like, how does it make you physically feel? If it makes you physically feel bad, it's probably not good for you, mm-hmm. right? If it makes your heart sad, if it just really puts you into a headspace that is is either not healthy for you. We've talked about this on this podcast before. If you start having bad thoughts, if you just feel hopeless and helpless, like those are not good, healthy spaces. So if it makes you feel bad, then that is a really good indication that something is amiss, and you probably need to figure out a way to make some changes in some form or fashion.
And what a lot of people don't realize is, I grew up in a family background where drinking alcohol, period, was just wrong. It was a sin. I had relatives that just felt that way, and the preachers would preach on it and so forth. Jesus turned water into wine. He it wasn't grape juice. They didn't have Welch's back then. It was wine, and people drank wine. The problem isn't the use; it's the abuse. Right. It's when you begin abusing things, and you recognize that things are going wrong because of the abuse that you're going through. And then you either realize it and you start looking for ways to overcome it, or you just continue to live in it and pretend it's not a problem.
Yeah.
And if you start seeing that things are not going well, it's a problem.
Yeah. There's a broad stroke that tends to get brushed, especially with alcohol. I know people, too, who there is absolutely never a good reason to have an alcoholic beverage. I can tell you personally, I found plenty of good reasons to have an alcoholic beverage every now and then. But, and I do think about the Jesus turned water to wine often. And it's as you recounted that, I remembered, and I've talked about my grandmother on this podcast before. Most God-fearing woman I ever knew in my entire life. And in fact, used the two pastors that preached her funeral used her two Bibles to preach her funeral, calling out specific Bible verses that she had marked in her Bible. So, this is like next level.
Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense.
And she had a bottle of Applejack brandy in the basement, and she wasn't afraid to dip into it every now and then. So, but it's about the ongoing behavior, right? She didn't go into it every day. I'm pretty sure she didn't go into it every day. But it's the thing isn't necessarily bad. Mm-mm. It's what you do with it. It's like money. We've talked about that before. It's not money that is the root of all evil. It's the love of money that is the root of all evil, right? Like you have to really be specific on kind of what you're looking at. So let's get back to this study because it really looked at 4 very specific things. Yeah. Specifically internet browsing and looking at implications of lust, idleness, and addiction. I looked at violent crimes per capita, reflecting a reflection of the wrath and lack of compassion on other people, alcohol consumption, ties to gluttony and a loss of self-control, and then gambling activities is greed, covetousness, and the pursuit of material wealth. And I would even argue, too, gambling and alcohol with both a lack of self-control. Mm-hmm. I think that kind of crosses over into both of those areas. So we'll kind of tap into our biblical expert in the room. So let's talk a little bit about how these actions specifically tie to biblical warnings against these pieces.
Yeah, and both in the Old and New Testament, there are admonitions about getting drunk. Even back in those days, they recognized very well, even in the earliest days, as soon as anybody learned how to ferment things, then suddenly people started going nuts.
Whole new world.
Yeah, it was a whole new world. And bad things started to happen in the process of that. And so the Bible was clear on the teaching of don't get out of control. That was the bottom line of that. Jesus probably wouldn't have turned water into wine if wine was a bad thing to have around.
Fair.
The reality is he was trying to keep that party going. He wanted that young couple to enjoy their wedding, and they were about to be embarrassed, and he didn't want them to be embarrassed. But Jesus did not condone also getting out of control and not functioning properly in life. And the Bible on lots of levels talks about that and tries to gets us to make decisions that are going to be good for us and those around us, whether it be family or friends or anyone else. Mm-hmm. Gambling's the same way. Not too long ago, well, it's been longer ago now, but I was in a conference, and one of the pastors got off on gambling, and he said, and he was telling people, you need to not, the Bible clearly teaches that gambling's a sin. And I just spoke up and I said, with all due respect, brother, it doesn't say that. And he said, It does so. I said, no, it doesn't. I said, and he started to get aggravated. I said, no, wait a minute. I said, if you had said gambling can lead to these problems, X, Y, and Z, I said, I would have said amen in a heartbeat. What you said was, the Bible clearly teaches that gambling's a sin. And I said, from Genesis to Revelation, gambling's never mentioned, not once. I said, the issues of not being able to control ourselves around things or becoming addicted to them, those are bad things, and the church needs to address that. But let's not say the Bible says if it doesn't. The Bible does teach that you should not get drunk, that it can lead to bad things. It doesn't say that about gambling, but we know what it can lead to. Mm-hmm. And if it does, then that's harmful to you. It's harmful to your family. There's a golfer whose name I won't even call right now, largely because I can't remember it. I'm old, you know. But he's admitted recently that he had gambled away $40 million.
Holy cow.
And lost it. I don't care how much money you're making. There's a problem when you gamble away $40 million. That will take a toll on you. If it's taking $50 away and your family needs it to live, you've got a problem, and you need to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah. What about the violent crimes and the internet browsing? So violent crimes, I feel, is pretty clear because it's one of the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Thou shalt not kill. That's pretty clear. But internet browsing, okay. In reality, the Bible was written well before the internet was introduced.
So
here's a touchy question. Does that make the Bible irrelevant?
No, it doesn't make it irrelevant because it doesn't say anything about the internet, but it does say some very important things about lust. And lust hadn't changed. We have a new mechanism for fulfilling that lust. But that's where we get back to the baseline of the sin. Mm-hmm. Sin is that thing inside us that makes us be tempted to do things we know are not healthy for us or that will lead to difficult things. There's nothing in the world wrong with the internet. There's nothing wrong with having a computer in your house. It depends on how you use it.
Sure.
It's just like the alcohol. It's just like gambling and so forth. The Bible is always going to be relevant on the baseline of things. It just simply doesn't address the mechanism always.
Right. And that's the beauty of the Bible, in my opinion, is that it is always a great place to just kind of ground yourself. Yeah. Go back to the basics.
The Bible doesn't address firearms either because they didn't exist back in that day. But it does address, as you just pointed out, killing people. Mm-hmm. Thou shalt not kill. They had lots of good ways to kill people back in that day too, and they did a lot of it.
They did,
and God didn't like it.
Yeah,
it was an abomination to Him. That's why He made it one of the commandments.
Yeah.
Just because you didn't have a particular method for being able to do that didn't change the after effect or the intentionality in a heart that caused it to happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So. This survey, and Steve, I'm going to lean on you to help us with how this actually ranked out. The survey revealed the top most sinful states within the U.S. So can you reveal what those are?
The top sinful state in the U.S., then if everybody's out there, everybody make your guess right now, okay, before I tell you what this is. It's Nevada. So very interesting that all those hit the points there because it ranks, which is kind of strange. It ranks first in jealousy, ranks second in excesses and vices, ranks first in greed. There goes to gambling.
Well, yeah.
But it ranks 8th in anger and hatred. I don't know how all that doesn't rank that first either, because I would think people losing money is not a happy group of people.
Well, they're probably too drunk in the moment to be that angry about it.
But jealousy. I think they've separated something shouldn't have been separated. There is hatred. If you become jealous of somebody, you're immediately going to start becoming angry at that. Jealousy causes that. It causes so. They probably should have put those together,
and that makes it number one, right?
Mm-hmm. Number two,
they probably should have called me before they did this survey. Right. That's the bottom line.
There you go.
Number two is another out west state, which was California.
Okay,
so that was interesting, and then it jumps to the East Coast to Florida. I wouldn't have thought that, but Louisiana is quick right behind it is fourth. Okay. and then Texas is 5th. So, but if you really feel like you want to move to a state that has the least sin, is Idaho. So,
that's because nobody lives in
I was
Idaho.
going to say that. The population isn't quite.
Do we have any listeners in Idaho? I apologize.
See, and we're from Virginia. We're in Virginia, doing this in Virginia.
Yeah.
And, things happen around our state. Kind of crazy and stuff like that. And we're ranked 26th. So you can look at that, but they were looking at these rankings like you indicated before on specific methodology. So they were kind of nailing down, what they consider lust and greed and vices. We were talking about, internet browsing and lust. Some of the vices they look at as, number of obese people, number of fast food restaurants there are, excessive drinking, people who report about drunk driving, adult smokers. You guys, everybody sit down here if you're not already sitting and listening to podcasts. They even ranked adult coffee drinkers. What? So there's interesting things that
they've just gone to meddling now.
So there were the sins that they were looking at. This is what fascinated me about this, and wanted to get this conversation going is that everything we do in excess, and when we talked about this, is a behavior that we don't need to be doing. We need to get away from this. But one of my favorite disciples goes, the things I try to do right, I don't seem to be able to do it.
That's the Apostle Paul. That was his deal. The sin I would not do, I do, and the sin I would not do, I do not do. It's just he's very straightforward in saying I screw things up.
And he was hooked into Jesus pretty well.
And he was hooked into Jesus very well.
So we were laughing about the coffee thing because Tommy and I are both sitting here drinking our coffee, and Steve's drinking his tea, which is apparently not sinful.
Apparently not, but it's also there's something wrong with somebody who doesn't like coffee. I'm just sorry. Need to pray for him anyway.
This is such a basic one that if you're listening to this and going, wait, what, coffee? So we talked earlier about how if things make you feel bad, then maybe you need to look at what you're doing, right? Coffee or even tea, because I've been here with tea myself. Mm-hmm. If you have too much caffeine, you may not sleep.
Right.
And you need sleep to recover. Like that's going to literally make you feel bad.
I'll
so
take
even
that
some
one
of the
a
basic
step beyond. I used to drink just pure caffeinated coffee all the time. And in college, I have had since I was in grade school bad stomach problems. Well, I was an idiot and I didn't put two and two together on that. Yeah. And so I started drinking decaf coffee after breakfast. Mm-hmm. And I was amazed at how much better my stomach got. Mm-hmm. The caffeine was what was setting a lot of that off. But I guess just the stage in life I was in, I just didn't put two and two together on that until much later. Well, I had a very intelligent doctor who said, how much caffeine do you drink? And I said, a ton. And she said, I would suggest you cut that out. That may have something to do. That didn't fix the total problem, but it made a big difference in it. So, it can be. Absolutely. There's another side to that, too. I know a couple of people who go to the coffee shops 3-4 times a day. Mm-hmm. Well, you're talking about $4 a shot, $5 a shot, or more, depending on what they get. Yeah. And one of them, of those three, struggles financially all the time. Mm-hmm. And they came to talk to me about it. I said, you can make coffee at home, and it's for pennies on it. Right? You might want. That's one thing you could cut out. And they said, you didn't have to say that. I said, well, I'm just trying to be helpful here.
How frustrated are you?
Yeah, I said, you're spending $20 a day on coffee.
Yeah, those unlimited coffee clubs get me because I'm like, I could never drink enough to constitute the value there. It just doesn't make sense. Okay, so here's a big, possibly controversial question. Are these behaviors more about individual failings or societal trends?
It can be. I would say it can be both of those.
Which one of those is more dangerous in your mind?
Oh gosh. Well, the societal trends have a broader effect.
Sure.
I mean, certainly, when a community becomes tolerant of something you really shouldn't be tolerant of, that is a problem. That's always been my worry with pornography. It is so available. It is hard to keep that out of the hands of particularly children and youth, and especially even high school age. They're not smart enough to sort out what's bad and what it's not. So that can really be a problem. On the other hand, we all know how much of a problem it can be on a personal basis.
Right.
Where you go. I was looking on our little outline we use here. It's Matthew 5:28. Anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. That line became famous because President Carter used it at one point, and everybody remembers it. But it's focusing directly on a woman. It looks lustfully at a woman. One of the most growing problems in America right now is addiction to porn by women, especially young women. I had a young co-ed come to me last year. Was a co-ed that if anyone else had known would have been shocked that she was coming with this problem, because she's regular in church, she's grown up in a wonderful family and so forth, but she came to me because she knew that she could not leave pornography alone at night. And was wanting help with it, and I got her to a good counselor that had some expertise in that. Unfortunately, we don't have a good support group right here in our area. You have to go some distance to get to a support group, but I gave her that support group too. And I kept meeting with her, and it had just become one of those things. She started looking at it out of curiosity and would tell herself, I'm not going to do this anymore, and yet would end up back there. There's just kind of an addiction. Well, it's really grown among young women in that respect. So this Bible verse doesn't just apply to men looking at women. There's you've got the other side of that nowadays as well.
Yeah, you do.
You may have always had it, but you certainly had it.
I think you always did. I just think, from the perspective that the Bible is generally written, it's written by men.
Yeah.
Right? So you hear about women. There are many women that are noted specifically in the Bible playing very critical roles, but they didn't write any of the stories that are there. And I think, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I'm just saying that's just a fact. That's the way it is. Had there been a woman that wrote one of these books, it might have I would think it would have a very different spin on it even then. I do think some of the challenges.
Jesus was addressing a patriarchal society, so
yes,
of course he came at it from a man's point of view. That was the reality of it. But you also need to remember that David really screwed up the kingdom because of a woman taking a bath right outside his window. Generally, you don't take a bath outside the king's window if you don't want to be seen.
It's not a great idea, ladies.
You're trying to get somebody's attention if you're doing that.
Yeah, so I'll go back to my question for you of, which is worse. And I feel like, yes, society absolutely can influence our individual choices. So we have to be really aware of what we're allowing to influence our perspectives. I would not call it an individual failing. I do think it's an individual challenge. Because here's the reality. I fail every single day. Every single day at something I fail. Sometimes I fail it a lot every single day. But I think being aware of what is specifically challenging, like you talked about the young lady who recognized that she was challenged with this temptation, knowing that she wanted to make a change and knowing that she needed support in doing so. And thankfully, she came and got the support and direction that she needed, and you put her on a path. But it is our responsibility. I mean, society is going to, for whatever reason, because they're trying to influence you, sell you, get you to join whatever group they are going to try to convince you. That is their job, but it's your job to discern where you're supposed to be and what aligns with what feels right for you.
I'll even go to a little different trend here. Is there's a particular I'd say group of people in our country right now that's working very diligently to convince you that the more money you make, the better you are.
Yeah.
And there's a real sense of if you're a multimillionaire or a billionaire, there's something, you're smarter than everybody around you, or you're just a better person than the people around you. And I think you'd be very hard pressed to show that as, Jesus didn't even have somewhere to sleep.
Right.
And I think he's probably the best person to ever walk the earth. I don't think there's any. I've even had atheists say that, I like to read about Jesus because he seemed to get everything right. They don't believe in a God, but they really do admire him.
Well, because nobody gets it all right.
That's right.
Right? I mean, we are human. We are designed to not get it all right. We've got sin built into our DNA. We're born with that. And it's funny you talk about the money piece. So the financial journey that I've walked and a lot of others have walked. I mean, I've been on the side where I thought if I had more money, it would make all the difference, right? I'll be happy. I'll be able to breathe. I'll be able, do all these things I want to do. Living on the other side of that equation, sure, it makes a difference. But I'll tell you where the happiness comes in is when you're able to do something meaningful with those resources. You're able to give. You're able to just in whatever way you want. Like, it's not just you want to round up for this particular charity at the grocery store, right? You can intentionally say, we're going to give this amount of money to this particular charity because this is something that means something to us. And we do that, over and over and over throughout the year. You get to do that when you've got that kind of freedom. And that's where the happiness comes from. So just a little tip. If you're looking for happiness and just through a paycheck, you're not going to find it.
Ain't going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
I know that if you have too little money and you don't know how to pay your bills, it's going to cause unhappiness.
Oh,
There's
absolutely.
no question about that.
Absolutely. But there's fixes for that too.
There
right?
really is.
There's journeys for that.
Ways to get to come to that. You quoted it just a few minutes ago, 1 Timothy 6:10. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil.
Yep.
And I think that's where some of the struggles that I see is happening is, when you've got more money than you could ever spend, and yet you're doing nothing to be helpful to the world with that. You've got a problem that's going on there. On the other hand,
and it's not a money problem.
And it's not a money problem. It's not. It's a character problem. It's a sin problem.
It's a heart problem.
It really is.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out how to deal with that. On the other hand, you can have the folks like Truett Cathy, who made millions and millions of dollars through Chick-fil-A and gave huge amounts of it to support people. He was well known for he would find an employee in one of his restaurants that was just not able to pay their bills, and he'd go pay their bills for them. That's a heart issue as well.
It is.
It's a transformed heart that makes a difference.
Yeah. So you talked about Matthew, the verse about internet browsing. We've got other verses that tie to some of these topics. So Proverbs 14:29 talks about violence and wrath. Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly.
You could not have a more appropriate verse. I had to wrestle for years with having a quick temper.
Really?
Yeah. I know that's a shock. But it really was one of those situations where I had to really stop and train myself. You just step back and you wait. Yeah. Just wait. Particularly dealing with staff. I supervise. I've always pastored it, with the exception of my first church. I've pastored larger churches and had staff with them. And what I had to train myself to do is if something went wrong and I got aggravated, I would usually wait till the next day. Just step back from it, walk away, and wait, because I knew I would say the wrong things if I said it when I was angry. But if I waited till the next day, we'd sit down and have a reasonable conversation. And so unless it's something that just can't wait, it's big enough that it can't wait, I try to step away from it. And even then, if it's something that just can't wait, I try to step out and go walk a minute or two and think about, okay, what do you need to say? And what's the real problem you're addressing here? And how do you go about doing that? Yeah. Because every time that I've ever let my temper get away from me, I said the wrong things and made the wrong choices.
And this is, according to this study, some of the things that they are listing underneath this particular behavior is bullying. I mean, that's really high on that. Hate crimes, share of maltreated children, teen dating violence, sharing internet comments that are hostile for you people that enjoy doing that, road rage, mass shootings. So these are violence and behavior because we're just not thinking first. We're just diving into things.
I just recently, I've got a friend that we've been friends for 50 years. We don't see each other very often, but we met in college and been friends. politically, he and I could not be further apart. We're just poles apart in his positions. He'll post things sometimes, and and he made a comment on something that was posted the other day, and an individual started just blatantly attacking him on that. And I stepped in and I said, okay, I don't agree with him either. I don't agree with the position he's taken. But I said, you're attacking somebody here who's a really good person. Mm-hmm. I said, this is an individual that I know would drive across the state to come and help me if I was in trouble. Mm-hmm. And he knows I would him. I said, we're never going to agree on politics. I said, I spend a whole lot of time. We both grew up in Georgia in the same region. I said, I spend a whole lot of time saying, bless his heart. But I said, you know, once we don't talk politics, we're on good level ground with each other. So you've got to be careful what you say and how you say it.
I wish more people had that perspective, especially when it comes to politics and social media. And I'm one of those that I have my very own, my distinctly own opinions about politics and some other things as well. I just don't voice it. Like, I have my opinions. I might agree with you. I might not agree with you. I might agree with you on some things and not others. And that's okay. That does not have to affect the relationship that we have, right? But it does with so many people. And the venom that is coming out of some of these posts, I'm like, oh my gosh, it causes me to delete apps like I've done recently. Right. I'm like, okay, I'm not even engaging. And it's too much. So just be kind with people. And remember, we are all entitled to our own opinions and our own beliefs. And not all of us are going to be right. Not all of us are going to be wrong.
So I just like you, I never express my opinion on anything.
Oh, yes. I've seen you never express your opinion on anything.
But I do try to be respectful of people that, you know, are disagreeing with me. You know, they have the right to disagree. They don't have the right to be mean.
I agree.
That's the deal. That's where I come down is these individuals that was jumping on this friend of mine. He's ultra conservative, and we all know, anybody who's ever known him, he's always been that way. And, you know, and those of us who are on the other side of that, but he's a good person with a good heart. And these folks didn't know him. They don't know anything about him except he disagreed with their opinion. So I said, you know, you need to chill out a little bit. You don't know who you're dealing with here.
And that's the harm of social media, too. I was just talking to somebody about this the other day, that the fact that you are no longer having that interaction that you once would have had in person, or you wouldn't have had it at all, you're now having it through a screen with someone that you will potentially never see.
Yeah.
Because you don't actually know. Either they happen to cross your feed, or you're a quote unquote friend because they're friends, quote unquote, with somebody that you know, right? So it's just, we've gotten really lax with just.
And oddly enough, that's what happened in this case. These were both good people. They disagreed on an issue, and suddenly that issue became a reflection of character.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be a reflection of character. I'm very honestly, there's just people out there that are just nasty and mean.
Yes.
And so they just use social media to be nasty and mean. But these were two good people who were squaring off with each other on this, and these are two good people that would have really liked each other if they met each other.
Yeah.
You know, because it's hard not to like the two of them.
So we've talked about alcohol already in the Bible, so we'll talk about alcohol use and gluttony specifically. So Proverbs 20, verse 1 says, wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise.
And the key word there is deceived.
Deceived.
Is, you know, that it's easy to be deceived by alcohol. It doesn't, you know, you start getting a little lightheaded, you drink a little alcohol.
They call that a buzz, folks.
They call that a buzz. They certainly do. And it's easy to take that next step.
It is.
You know, and when you do, then that's usually when bad things start to happen out of that. Is it, you know, it can go wrong. I do notice that they did alcohol use and gluttony. They didn't give you a Bible verse for gluttony.
They didn't. I noticed that too.
You know, and it's interesting. There's not one that's actually coming to my head right now, but they're out there. But, you know, that's just one more time they're meddling here.
Yeah.
They
should have just come to you from the beginning.
Yeah, they should have just, you know, I love good food, and I have to be very careful because I've made the joke before. I can smell a nice meal and gain 5 pounds, so I really do have to work on that one. Gluttony is one that I think about that every Thanksgiving. It's America's national celebration of the sin of gluttony.
Well, there you go.
We eat until we're miserable, and then we lie down and go to sleep while the ball game's on, and we don't want to eat for the rest of the day, but we do. We keep going.
We don't need ask, why did I just do that?
Yeah, why did I just eat that?
Well, folks, you don't need a Bible verse for gluttony. You've got Tommy's personal marketing slogan for Thanksgiving. So there you go.
Oh.
All right. So what society has really normalized all of these behaviors. And from my perspective, that's, we talked earlier about just the whole community impact and is society to blame. Just the normalization of these behaviors, not the normalization in that these are challenges that we all face and there's ways that you can overcome these in a healthy way, but rather it's been normalized as everybody does it. Mm-hmm. It's normal we live in a college town, to go out and get drunk at a college bar on a Friday and Saturday night, right? These are normalized. And I think that's a real harm to our society.
It unquestionably is. And you don't have to go any further than right in one block from where we are right now. And on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night, those are known in Blacksburg as the drinking nights, and you see that happening, and hugely bad choices happening as a result of that. I've had more than a few young women who have come to me who have said, I know that I was sexually assaulted, but I don't know who it was. I barely remember it happening, but I know it did. Yeah. And they went and got tested, and sure enough, that's exactly what had happened. Well, it happened because everybody there, male and female, were drinking too much, and they made choices. Things wouldn't happen that might not have happened if they had been sober.
All of them, not some of them.
The only reason I said some is there are some males out there that will stay more sober just because they know there's going to be a drunk girl there and they can take advantage of it.
Absolutely fair, and I wish there were more of those, candidly, in the world. But I just want to be clear that the message that we are sending is not that women should not drink to prevent from being sexually assaulted.
Oh, absolutely.
It is never okay to be sexually assaulted. It's never okay to be assaulted under any circumstances. And just for additional clarity, men can be sexually assaulted too. This can happen both ways. So if everybody uses discernment, keep coming back to that word today, make good choices. I tell our kids that all the time. I even tell the dog that. Make good choices. You
were talking about a man being sexually assaulted. I'm a police chaplain. I dealt with that not too long ago, and the police didn't call me. It wasn't a police case, but it was an individual who came to me because they knew I had experience in that kind of thing, and they had been at a party, and they were absolutely certain. We had an individual right here in the community that got killed not too long ago by an individual who knew they had been sexually assaulted and went and beat the guy who did it, and it ended up killing him. Yeah. Well, it was you had terrible things on both sides of that, but it can just lead to awful things if you let things get out of control, or you just make choices that can never honor God or anybody else.
Right. Mm-hmm. So here's a loaded question for you that could lead to a whole nother podcast. Is America drifting further from the biblical values, do you think?
Well, yeah, because it's drifting further and further from just faith life. It's the people attending church. It's at an all-time low right now. It's continuing to drop. It is interesting, though, that if you do surveys across the country, people will talk about what a high opinion they have of Jesus, but they don't always have a high opinion of church. Mm-hmm. And truthfully, there's some good reasons for that. There are. So they start pulling away from that, and it makes it hard. But the further you pull from that, the less likely you are going to be invested in the things that will help you to be more biblically centered.
And the Bible calls you to be a part of a church community.
Yes,
I mean, that's a biblical direction. How much of the shifting though away from the Bible, from the biblical values, do you think ties to people's perception that they will have to give up some of their freedoms to live what the Bible says is a moral life?
Well, I think there's bound to be some of that. I mean, I've had people say before to me, I know this is the wrong thing to do, but I like doing it. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not new.
Right.
Well, it goes back as far as time, but I think you're seeing more of that as well. And I think it would be an interesting study just to see how far that has gone and what's happening with it. I do think that. I wouldn't be in the faith business if I didn't think it mattered, and if I didn't think it made a difference in people's lives and didn't make a difference in their choices. I do think you've got to be careful to make sure it doesn't become a law code instead of a grace code.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because it's easy to. Well, the Bible says, and so you start passing judgment on someone and screwing up their lives, doing that. And I think you need to be very careful with that, because the bottom line for Jesus was grace, not law. Mm-hmm. It was, love your neighbor as yourself. Love God with all your heart. Love one another as I have loved you, and that sense of forgiveness. But he also didn't, when the woman who was caught in adultery, he saved her life and kept people from stoning her, and then he said, "Who has condemned you? No one, sir. Neither do I condemn you. Now go and sin no more."
Right.
Get out of the behavior that didn't cause this mess, but led you to a place to where the other people's sin was about to kill you.
Right. Yeah.
Make good choices.
Well,
is the bottom line of that.
I think all of us in the room here at the moment, and many of us listening, realize that there's a lot of freedom when you're not caged by bad behaviors or excessive behaviors that you're doing. So there is a freedom there. And I would challenge anybody listening, because the question I want to ask is, there may be people out there who are not biblically based, is how do you get away from these behaviors that are excessive and causing you to not be productive in society, or you have other problems? My first inclination was something that maybe Tommy had in a message years ago. You may not remember this. Is how do you want people, if you were going to die, and people at your funeral are going to say, what do you want being written about you? Do you want to be written that I was always drunk during, Thursday through Friday while I was at college? I was venting on Facebook, or wouldn't sit down and talk with somebody about their problems because I thought they were completely off base. What do you really want to embody as the memory of you to other people? What do you want legacy do you want to leave here? So.
Yeah.
I think it was in that sermon, Steve, but it may have been in a different one that I talked about. I did a funeral, and I went to the funeral home to meet with the family. I never met the family, but they had connections in the past to our church. And at that small church that I was in, we had a cemetery. They wanted to bury them there, and I walked in, and the widow was sitting there, and I walked in and introduced myself, and I said, "I'm very sorry for your loss." And she said, "Well, by God, I'm not. That was the meanest bastard I ever knew in my life." Well, as I went on and had these conversations, I stepped outside with the adult children, and I said, "I know your mom's just upset." And they said, "No, Reverend, you don't understand. We don't have a single good memory of our dad, not a single one."
That's sad.
And they said, "We're not here because we loved him. We're here because he was our dad, and we have to take care of burying him. But, we have to do this, but we don't have any good memories." Well, do you want to be remembered that way? And apparently it didn't matter to him, or he would have changed somewhere along the line. Right. But Lord knows I don't want to be remembered that way. I want somebody to come to my funeral and say something nice. I'd appreciate it. Yeah. And I'd like for them to be able to do it without lying. Right.
I could say that you always have a witty comeback.
Thank you very much.
So back to the study. So Steve, you shared at the beginning that kind of the spoiler alert for this was they're wanting to legislate offerings that states have to curb these behaviors.
Right.
And the part of that that's interesting to me is while the idea of that, I think, is probably a good one, making sure that there are community resources available. If you think about it from a business model, you need to create something that is sustainable and that reaches the masses, right? But we've already said here today that everybody's reason for doing these things is different, which means you may not be able to find a model that reaches the masses.
Right.
And even if you do, you're still missing folks. They're missing something. So, you know, while the intention, I think, probably here is a very good one, really, I think we need to figure out a way to get more at the core of what's causing, as Tommy, you said at the beginning, the sin itself, not the sins being the behaviors.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, because really the sins are just the symptom of a deeper something.
And it's hard to legislate the core.
It is.
It really is.
It is.
There's some you have to have. I mean, there needs to be legislation against robbery and murder and rape and all the things that go with that. But you can't legislate every single thought that anybody has.
But even with that, we have the legislation for those things, and they still happen.
Yeah, they still happen.
Because there's still, at the core, people either don't understand it's wrong, they don't care that it's wrong, you know, they're getting carried away. There's something else that's going on that is just not being addressed.
And that's the tough part, is quite often it's that they don't care. They've become so separated from right from wrong that wrong seems right and they're okay with it.
Yeah.
You know, and so they just go right on. I think about the organized crime. You know, those people live in a world where there is a code. I mean, in the mob, there's a code of certain things you do and don't do. But most of the things they do are wrong, and they're okay with that.
But it's aligned with code.
That's right. That's right. It's
so somebody
with
somewhere has deemed that it's appropriate, and they've bought into that.
That's right.
So again, you've got to remember when you're consuming information, advice, whatever you're looking at, is it designed for your best interest? And I mean, we're going to take the mob off the table for this, because I guess if you're following it, your best interest is probably staying alive, and that keeps you alive, is my guess. But so that might be an exception to the general line of thinking. But you know, is it really designed for your best interest, or is it designed for someone else's best interest that actually, if you dig into it, is not best for you?
Yeah, that's absolutely that. You need to try to sort those things out as you're going along, and the motives behind them.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, another lively chat.
And it's certainly been a lively chat on this one.
Yeah.
You know.
So we're really interested how you, as listeners, interpret these findings through your own moral or spiritual lens. So join us in the conversation. We would love to hear from you. Drop us a line at renewedminds@churchonmain.church or tag us on Instagram at renewedminds.connect. And we thank you for investing your time with us today. If you found this episode enlightening, helpful, or just interesting, hit subscribe and so that you never miss an episode. And remember to follow and share this podcast with others, opening up your own dialogue on these topics. And until next time, we hope you approach each day with a renewed mind.
Thank you for coming.
Hopefully this brings a renewed perspective to the challenges and opportunities you're facing today. What steps will you be taking to show love and grace to everyone? If you have any questions or comments about our podcast, please send an email to renewedminds@churchonmain.church. You may also leave comments on Instagram at renewedminds.connect. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us. Listen next week for the next Renewed Mind.